I hope everyone had a fantastic Christmas and had your fill of not only turkey or ham, but also football and basketball that was played on Christmas Day with the NFL and NBA. With all that being said, there was one game that was played in the district before Christmas break happened. And with all the other teams off till the new year, without further ado, let's jump into the only team that had a game this week. And that team was the Vincennes Trailblazers as they played Southwest Tennessee on December 20th and handled them from the opening tip to the final horn, winning 95-61. Ryan Oliver had 6 rebounds and 5 assists to go along with a 6 for 12 shooting night and finished with 19 points. Demarion Yates had a 5 of 9 shooting performance to finish off his 2023 portion of the season. He also had 12 points. Michael Osei-Bonsu grabbed 9 rebounds and made 5 shots as he added 12 as well. The final starter in double figures was Kyrie Dixon, who went 7 of 11 from the field and grabbed 7 rebounds. He finished with 16 points. Gerald Thomas was 7 of 10 from the field off the bench for Coach Franklin, and he added 16. As a team, the Blazers dominated the boards 45-25 and shot 54.3% from the field and netted 9 threes as a team. So this week there is no matchups, and in previous episodes I have talked about my next guest so much as he has kept me up to date on what goes on around the district and has given me stats apart from as a part of a mass email he sends out. And from the bottom of my heart, I am so thankful not only for that, but for him taking the time out of his busy schedule to sit down with me as we talk about his time as the voice of the Vincennes Trailblazers and how he got into broadcasting as a whole. It is my distinct honor to jump into my interview with Dave Hunter, the hardest working radio play-by-play man in the junior college basketball business. Welcome back to a special edition of this week's podcast. There was only one game this week in the Central District on the Division I level, and that was Vincennes against Southwest Tennessee. I'm going to bring in my guest for this week's episode. I know 2 weeks in a row I have a special guest. This week is a very special guest for Vincennes fans. He has been the voice of the Blazers for well over 20 years and has been to almost every single VU game since Belis Jim. He is the voice of the Trailblazers on WVUB 91.1, Mr. Dave Hunter. Dave, thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, thank you, Justin. Actually, it's 42 years with the
I was going to say I'm way off on that one. So, what got you into calling games for Vincennes and WVUB?
Well, going way back more than 50 years. When I came out of the Army, I had returned to a job that I had prior to enlisting in the Army. That was in 1964. And when I came out of the Army, I went back into a retail job at a variety store. But I wanted to get into broadcasting, really wanted to get into broadcasting. So after about 4 years, I quit a good paying job and jumped into broadcasting at the lowest possible level, at the lowest possible salary, just so I could get into sports. That was in 1972. And I did high school games here in Vincennes for about 10 years. And then the station that I worked for, the person who had done the Trailblazer games for about 17, 18 years, no longer was at the radio station. And I got the opportunity to switch over and start doing VU games. And I did both high school and VU games in Vincennes until about 2003 or 2004. And then I started doing just the Trailblazer games only. I switched stations in 1994 and went to WVUB, but I still continued to do some of the high school games. But so starting in the 1982-83 season was my first year with Trailblazer basketball.
Oh, wow. That is, and you've seen some Trailblazer greats, Sean Marion, Carl Landry, for the newer generation of people. You've also seen, even as late as, who's the kid that just went to Cleveland Cavaliers?
Oh, Craig Porter.
Yeah, Craig Porter, local kid. So you've seen it all, heard it all. You've gone through multiple coaches, and what has been the most receptive and most pushback that you've had from each coach?
Well, I've had great cooperation from from all the coaches. Dan Sparks, obviously, is an icon of junior college coaching and member of the Hall of Fame. I didn't know Alan Bradfield well. I think in the 70s I did one or two games when my boss, who was doing the games then, was not available. So I did a couple of games, but when I took over, Dan was the head coach, and of course I was with him until he left in 2005, and then of course Eric Sullivan came along, and then followed by David Ragland, now Coach Todd Franklin. But I can't say enough good things about the cooperation that I've gotten from the coaches. I think, Justin, that I got to tell you, one of the things I enjoy most about doing this job is the relationship that I've had over the past 50 years with all of the coaches I've encountered. I've had very few situations where the coach was not receptive, cooperative, respectful. I sat down once and tried to figure out how many coaches I've interviewed that are in various halls of fame in different levels of sports. It's well over 100. And that's just been it's been real nice to be able to call coaches and talk to them, or coaches sometimes call me. I think you develop a rapport. Too many sportscasters take a combative attitude sometimes toward the opponent and coaches, and they say things that coaches don't like, and you don't get respect that way. So I mean, I don't get me wrong. I am a rabid Trailblazer partisan. I mean, I want the Trailblazers to win and win every single game. But if we lose, as a broadcaster, I think you have to treat other teams with respect. I mean, we lost a very close game at Indian Hills 3 weeks ago in overtime. But I was quick to congratulate Coach Sash because his team won the game fair and square, and that's the way sports work. So I always enjoy the rapport that I have with all of the coaches, and I enjoy meeting new coaches, and of course renewing acquaintances with old coaches as well.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, now I've been following Vincent since I was a student there back in 2011. Coach Franklin's second year, I believe, on the job.
I believe that's right.
Yeah, and we had a whole new group of guys, and Coach Davis said, you're into broadcasting, Justin. Why don't you get to know Dave Hunter? He's our play-by-play guy, and at the time, you were doing everything solo. Essentially, you were doing stats, you were doing play-by-play. You had no color commentator. Have you been able to continue doing that as you've gone older, or have you gotten a little bit of help finally?
When I started in 1972, the radio station that I worked for, we covered all the local teams. If you're familiar with Vincennes, we had Vincennes, Lincoln, Rebay, South Knox, North Knox, and everybody at the station did play-by-play. And we helped and worked with each other. And then in about the mid-70s, I made an acquaintance with someone who turned out to be one of my 3 very best friends of all time, Randy Westfall. He worked at a local bank, but he was an basketball official. And I invited him to go along at a game one night. And for years after that, we worked games together. And then I also worked games with a gentleman named Don Skinner. Randy and Don have both passed away. But Don Skinner was my high school principal in Bicknell when I was in high school, and he was doing games for the radio station as well. He's a former player and coach, and we worked games together for years and years. A lot of EU games down the line. When I moved over to Vincennes University broadcasting, I used students sometimes during the broadcasts. It's not. I don't want to be disrespectful, but it's difficult for the students to have the depth and the background to contribute to the broadcast. And then there's a timing a situation where you step on each other when you're not used to working together. I mean, that's something that only gets better after you start working together. And then after a while, it just the students didn't do it anymore, and so I've done a solo broadcast. I'll be the first to admit I'm not the smartest guy in the world. So what I do is I script every single broadcast. The opening is a script. It's not anything's nothing. It's not nothing I do in the opening is ad lib. It's all scripted. And then I provide myself with material to cover the broadcast, no matter what the situation is. So if there's a lull, a delay, halftime, I've got material to cover information. Too many times I see broadcasters try to cover dead time by saying pretty much nothing. I try to provide information I think the fans probably want to hear, background, statistics, etc. And it takes time to do that. We're talking here this morning, and we have a game on Wednesday night against Southwest Tennessee. I'm absolutely full on prepared. I could sit down and broadcast that game right now, and that's the way I work. I'm always prepared. I was prepared Saturday to go down to Shawnee. It didn't happen because I was ill, but that's the way I work. I'm the first person in the gym, last person out of the gym. That's just the way that's the way I trained myself over the years, and that's what I do.
Well, and like I said, like that raised my bar of respect for you so much. I mean, it was already there when I heard you for the first time when we played Southeastern Illinois, and then just to continue to see you do it, you travel all on your own. Maybe your wife joins you from time to time, but you're able to go to every single one of our games. You're able to set up, tear down, and keep everything as much of a balanced broadcast as it can be. Of course, you mentioned that you're always going to root for Vincent. You're always going to root for Todd Franklin and Coach Davis, and now Kinsley.
James Kingsley. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Whoever that second assistant is in there, you're always going to root for them. But I've never seen you bad talk a coach, and like you said, that's how you build rapport with them. And really, what you've started. I don't know how long you've been doing this. I've only been getting the updates for the last couple years since I started thinking about doing a podcast like this. But you always send out so detailed information on stuff, and I've had to just take what you've written down for teams that haven't posted stats on NJCAA or something like that and just run with it. How do you do that when they don't post the stats on other websites?
When I first started, 1972, I talked earlier about the coaches. And when I first started in 1972, nobody really interviewed coaches before or after the games or whatever. And when I started doing the games, the guys I worked with at halftime would go back to the station for music and go out and smoke. Well, I didn't smoke, so I decided I was going to do a little more. So I started trying to do interviews, pregame interviews. If there's a coach in the stands, halftime interviews, postgame interviews, to to just provide more information, get more personality in the broadcast. And then also back then, it wasn't easy to get information like it is now because we had no internet. I mean, rosters. Most guys, and some guys still do this, which is unbelievable to me, but some guys still do this. Get a roster at the door, sit down, fill out their score sheet, and try to broadcast the game, which would drive me insane. If the reason I get to where I go early is because I set up my equipment and everything is fine, and then you can relax. If you're late, chances are you're going to have a problem one way or the other. So I couldn't do that. So I started getting rosters, calling ahead to athletic directors, coaches, getting their rosters, getting their stats if they'll give them to you, getting information and working ahead. Now then, with the internet, for the most part, we do have availability of rosters, heights, weights, classes. You can search background on where the players have been. Of course, the NJCAA now has the statistics website, which is good most of the time. Some programs are a little dilatory about putting their stats up, but it's getting much better. So you can research all that. I have if you recall, or if you remember being around me, I have a spotter sheet that has all the players on it, has all their stats at a glance. I have my own particular system of code, which probably nobody else could understand, that I use during the broadcast, so I can relate information, to the listener. So it takes work, Justin. I mean, I spend probably 2 to 4 hours at least before I do every broadcast. It's not just to show up, sit down in a comfortable chair, and run off the game. It's to me, it's work. It's a job. It's something I enjoy doing, and I enjoy doing it at the best level I can.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, you've done an amazing job, and I was more talking about like if, like, for example, you had the Logan Wabash Valley game last Saturday that didn't have any stats posted until Wednesday. All right. So how do you, when you shoot those email blasts to all the coaches and to the athletic directors and to me, how are you able to come up with those scores? And
Well, I've got of course, I have all the coaches on my not only my email list but also via text, and generally they're supposed to send me copies of the scorebook if they have a complete box score with field goal attempts, rebounds, etc. They'll send that to me, but the very least I get from them is the copy of the scorebook. Now that in itself can be a little bit of an obstacle
oh yeah,
because sometimes the scorebooks are completely filled out. Sometimes they're not filled out, and I have to compute the scores myself. Sometimes they're not as easy to read because they're scribbled. Whoever the handwriting is not as good enough to read. But usually, if they send they send me the scorebooks, then I can write out the stories. If they don't, then I just post the score and then I try to get information later. Sometimes if we're playing a team that's not in the region, I can contact that coach and get a scorebook, from them. But after the game is over, if a coach loses, he's probably not particularly happy and just wants to get out of the gym. So sometimes I don't get the scorebooks in a timely manner. But I just really do the best I can on that. I don't put a lot of information into those recaps because it does take time to write them up. I don't put 6-1 sophomore, so forth, so on. I just put the names because I'm assuming all of our region coaches know the names of the players on the other teams and their heights and detail or whatever. But I've got about, I don't know, 60 people on that list that I send out, including you.
yeah. And like I said, it has saved me on a couple of occasions, especially last year when Lewis and Clark didn't update hardly anything. But let's go ahead and jump into this district. I've talked to Coach Sparks, Coach Davis in the district, and I've talked to Coach Kendrick, who was an assistant coach for SIU Edwardsville last year. Actually, that episode just posted as we're recording this. And we talked about how I've always categorized our district as the Big Ten in junior college when it comes to iron sharpens iron. There's not really a bad team in this district. What have you been able to see throughout the 12 years, 13 years that we've been in this district?
It's been great for VU, without a doubt. It's made the schedule a lot more. It's made it easier to schedule games. Always before Coach Sparks and Sullivan and Ragland had to redo the schedule every single year. There were traditional teams that we played like Wabash Valley, Olney Central, Lincoln Trail, and so on. But once we went into the district, it stabilized the schedule. So Coach Sparks always campaigned for that because he always said I could hit a golf ball from our parking lot into Illinois, where we were playing teams from Michigan and Ohio and things like that. So at the time there were 11 teams, as you recall. Lewis and Clark was one, Southeastern Illinois was one. So that gave you 20 games, and then you have to find 10 more, which is pretty manageable. Now then, of course, this year there's only 9 teams, which means there's 16 games in your round robin schedule. But it's made the schedule much better. And of course, now then, because of the NJCAA rules regarding their rules regarding at-large teams, you have to play at least 26 Division I teams to get even considered for an at-large bid in the national tournament. So you could be 29-1, but not get an at-large bid because you played a half a dozen JV teams or preps or Division II or Division III teams. So the teams are now playing better games. That means we have to play Division I teams, and this year we have 28 Division I games. Some of the teams in the district aren't doing that yet, because it is difficult. It involves travel, and travel, of course, equates to expense. But what's happening is in other regions, some of these teams are beginning to come out of their regions and start playing games on the road against other Division I teams. A team from Texas actually went to Iowa last year. Teams from Florida are coming out of there and playing, out of their region, and it should be that way to give it more legitimacy, because you can argue. For years, when I first went to Hutchinson, Kansas, my first trip in 1973, I was inundated about how great Kansas was and how Kansas was the best and the most difficult and the elite of all junior college basketball. And over the years, I don't think that's been proven necessarily true. There are some great programs, great regions around, of course, Indian Hills and southeastern Iowa, um, Moberly, Missouri, along with Three Rivers, Missouri. And of course, Florida is very, very strong, very strong. Great teams. Texas, obviously, with two regions, very strong at one time. In Idaho, southern Idaho, and Snow and northern Idaho, and those teams were all very, very good. So, I mean, across the spectrum, there's some lot of good junior college basketball programs. Our region this year, I think, is kind of in the middle of the road right now. They've taken some raps from some of the teams outside of the region. Alney's had a couple of big successes, beating southeastern Iowa and beating Monroe out of New York. Of course, we've had some Division I wins out of our region as well. But I think the region right now is trying to find itself. I thought Kaskaskia's win over Alney on Saturday was a big win for Brian Hancock. His early schedule had not been particularly that difficult, but they played extremely well in the second half and knocked Alney off. And Alney's got a really nice ball club. Jim's done a great job with his team, and he's going to upset some teams during the course of the region schedule, which of course begins in earnest in January.
Yeah, and like I said, that has been like my biggest thing with Kaskaskia. Yes, give them credit; they're 12-1 going in, but you look at their schedule; they really haven't played anybody. To some extent, I mean, you have some tough opponents for Coach Hancock, but they've always struggled in battling them the second time around. Especially now, they finally fixed that against Simmons College. You mentioned the Lakeland game was very interesting to me because that came down to the final 2.9.
Yeah, they had a chance to win that game. I'm sure Brian was pretty disappointed. He was. I talked to him. He's pretty disappointed that they didn't pull that game out. But I mean, again, you hate to drop back on cliches, but at any given night, you got to go out and play 40 full minutes. And I think there's a competitiveness within the region. I mean, each coach really gears up to win those region games, and of course Vincennes and Logan, of course, has been a huge target. I think Logan's getting better. I think Tyler will get those guys around. I know they've already lost 7 games, so an at-large bid for them is going to be extremely difficult to argue. But as the January and February go along, they're going to improve, and again, they'll be a factor in the region tournament.
Yeah, and like Coach Kendrick said, they had to rebuild that whole schedule or the whole roster, and then on top of it, they had that gauntlet that you and I were talking about that schedule pre-district play, and to be 4 wins in that is phenomenal for completely new roster. So let's go ahead and talk about Vincennes a little bit more. Coach Franklin comes in and really turned that program around. I mean, I've always heard about Vincennes, didn't know about Landry or Marion going there when I walked into the door for the first time. Then I saw those jerseys. But the last couple of years, especially since COVID, what have you seen from the Trailblazers?
I think COVID kind of knocked the slats out from under all of society, let alone basketball, and it created that situation where they gave all those players an extra year of eligibility. And I'm not sure it was a good thing. I think after 2 years at a junior college, for most kids, it's really time to move on. And I'm not sure all of those third-year players were necessarily a good thing, but that's the way that it was. I think it made recruiting more difficult because coaches weren't able to get out and see kids in person, maybe talk to them in person like they were accustomed to doing. You can watch guys on video and they can just look really outstanding, but I think you want to meet a kid in person, bring him in, just get a better idea of his, not only his athletic skills, but also his personality, maybe what his dedication to the game is going to be. And you can't do that maybe just watching a video. So I think it made recruiting a lot more, difficult. I mean, junior college is kind of a strange animal. You can go from feast to famine, or famine to feast in one season, which of course we were 12 and 19 a couple of years ago because of several circumstances. But we come back last year with a 30-win season, so you can turn it around pretty quick by recruiting transfers. I think Logan is the most recent great example of what you can do with transfers, because last year, Tyler blended all of those guys into an extremely great basketball team, and they won the national championship on the strength of all those transfer kids. And that's tough to do because you're bringing guys in from other schools that have played under different systems. Now they have to learn your way of doing things, and to get everybody together on the same page and do that in one season sometimes can be difficult, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. But for Logan last year, it did. Now last year we had a couple of great transfers in Tazos Cook and Caleb Johnson. And then this year we don't have any transfers. We've got all returnees plus freshmen. So it can work well both ways. But I think COVID affected everybody in their way of recruiting. I hope we're out from under that now. I hope that's not ever going to be a factor again, and teams can get back to normal.
Yeah, and so let's go ahead and jump to March. As you know, we're sitting here in December. I know Coach Franklin, Coach Smith Peters, we talked about Logan and Vincennes always being a team that goes to Hutchinson, Kansas, and that week-long tournament. You've been there multiple times. You've seen the facelift of that sports arena. To somebody who's never been to that tournament, describe it the best you can.
Well, the arena itself is just, I mean, I guess I have one word: be comfortable. I mean, you walk in there and you immediately feel the presence of what the tournament is. There are certain gymnasiums, arenas, stadiums in this country where you feel that. Several years ago, I was working I'm a tennis official too. I was working a tennis match at Butler University, and it was late at night. We were indoors, but next to the Butler Fieldhouse, the tennis facility was next to Butler Fieldhouse. So we were working late. It was about 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and I was leaving, and I walked across the parking lot, and the building was open, and I walked in and stood at center court in Butler Fieldhouse with only ambient lighting in there because of security, and totally dark. But you could feel the presence of the history of that building just all around you. And I think Hutchinson is kind of the same way. You walk in there and all of the great games that have been played there, and all the great teams and the players. And so you feel that when you first go there. It's lost, I don't say some of its luster, but it's not the way it used to be because crowds just don't respond. When I first went out there in 1983, seats were hard to come by. I mean, it was sold out. In recent years, it does not. And things move on. I think people tend to follow their own teams, and when they're done, then they move on to some other activity. But the crowds the way they were are just not there anymore. And they changed the format. There were some that did not like the change of format, which I think was the greatest thing they've ever done, because you talked about all the great Trailblazer teams that we've had, that I've seen. And I can cite many years where we would have had an at-large bid after losing in the region tournament and had a chance to win a national championship. 87 is a good example of that year. We were coming off being the runner-up the year before, and we got beat by Kankakee in a region playoff game. We were good enough to win it that year. And there's been other years as well when we've lost and didn't get a chance to go out there and play. So going to 24 teams has been a good thing. It's added to I think to the credibility of the tournament. But it's still a great event. I know the NJCAA is trying to make steps to make it even better as far as TV coverage. That's good. This year, they've taken one step, which I'm not sure that I'm 100% in favor of, but the tournament is actually going to start on Sunday, and the semifinals will be on Thursday. There will be a day off on Friday, and the championship game will be on a Saturday. So that'll be new this year. So we'll actually start play on Sunday, and that stretches the week out. But we'll see how that works out. But that's what's going to happen this coming season.
Yeah, I will make one last comment here about them getting the national coverage. The only 2 years that it's been on national TV, a team from our district has been crowned the champions. Vincennes 2019 with CBS Sports, and Logan last year with ESPN. So I think that says a little bit more about our district, that we can go out there when the light is the brightest and put on a champion.
I think it's on ESPN Plus this year. Don't hold me to that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, so I mean, and I can tell you that it's a whole lot better than moving to. Before we were in the district, we had to go to, as you know, we had to go to Maryland and then New York. Talk about that one.
I listen. I've been to as far east as Westchester, New York. We played at Westchester Community College, and I've been as far west as Devil's Lake, North Dakota, which is about 50 miles from Canada. We've been north to the middle of Michigan. Vincennes has just been all over the place for district tournaments, and that was one of the things that Coach Sparks always campaigned for, is to get us into a more reasonable situation. There was one year that we traveled, I think, about 6,500 miles over the course of a month to go to Michigan and then North Dakota and then to Hutchinson in the space of less than 2.5 weeks. I mean, that's just, I mean, these are junior college kids. They don't fly. You don't fly in planes and make quick trips. Those bus trips can get really, really tedious and really long. So I don't miss those trips to the far west or the far east.
I really appreciate it, Dave. Again, this has been Dave Hunter with me, the voice of the Trailblazers for over 50 years, hopefully a couple more. Thanks so much, Dave.
Okay, Justin, great to talk to you. Thanks.
Yep.